to another edition of What You Said. So I'm going to be combining a lot into this video, hopefully as quickly as possible. I have several things to go through, like highlight stuff from the last 2 weeks. Um, what we've been kind of focusing on the last 2 weeks is really talking about like initial, like like those early, like research processes and steps that we do to find out like early stuff about a topic. First places that we go, how to evaluate the things that we spot in like those first places, like Google results, those first sets of articles, things like that. And kind of using that to get your LOI, your line of inquiry, kind of off the ground to get this project started. So it's kind of what we're doing this week with Studios 2, which is your kind of preliminary planning document for your LOI that we're going to be kind of workshopping this week. The workshop is Studio 3. So it's a little bit lighter week on like the work side because we are kind of focusing on that studio work. It's 2 studios in 1 week, so kind of trying to balance things out just a little bit. So I got a couple of things from students' work for I kind of focused on like some of the problems people usually have with peer response and some like connections with their reading. And then we're also going to be looking at kind of a tip sheet for like some of those do's and don'ts from the reading. And then we're going to be doing a little bit with content farms and tertiary sources and the research process. I'll probably end up actually having to split this video up into 2 shorter videos, and I'll start now with just the peer response, and then in the next video we'll do the content farms and the tertiary sources, like more of the research stuff, because we're going to be going through also those 5 articles that you looked at in the activity and which ones are content farms and that kind of stuff, and that's what I pulled your responses from. So we're going to start now with the trouble with peer response and some things that people had to say. So first, with this first student, what I kind of thought was interesting with this response is they have problems finding the issue with someone else's assignment. Like sometimes like possibly like knowing, I think what they said was like, I'll know something is wrong, but I'll have trouble pinpointing like exactly what that is or how to fix the problem. And I think that that's a really good point. One, because sometimes you can like, you know, the article does say like to be as specific as possible, and sometimes you can pinpoint like why something seems off, or maybe ask a question. There are multiple ways to give feedback. Sometimes you don't actually have to be able to say like exactly what's wrong and like exactly how to fix it. Sometimes it might be that you have a question that you can ask that helps like better frame like where you are. Like, I don't know how to fix this problem, but something feels wrong. It's unclear. I have a question, and maybe you can kind of word it that way. Sometimes you can use what I call, or what we'll call like descriptive feedback, where you'll try to just state back what you think they're trying to say or what point you think they're getting at. And sometimes you can really tell like when you're off, like when what you thought they were saying is not what they were saying. We'll do this a lot with the Studio 3 workshop, with you like trying to explain what your LOI is, and I'll try to say like, it sounds like you're focusing on this, and maybe I'm wrong and we're missing something somewhere. So there's lots of different ways to give feedback. I also think a lot of people said or like pointed out things about like trying to fix things or look for things that are wrong. And I think that's one of the misconceptions I think with peer feedback in general, is that it's supposed to be like at its heart like corrective. I don't even know if corrective is a word, but I'm going to use it here. Sometimes I make up words because they make sense to me and they feel appropriate, and they should be words. So it feels corrective, like you're supposed to be finding the things that are wrong with their work. And sometimes I'll just sort of like ask, just even from a reader perspective, to look at it like this. Like when you go online and you read stuff, or open a book and read it, you're not looking for what's wrong. you're reading it as a reader, you might notice like where you have questions, or you might be able to think about like what you agree or disagree with, or you might find things that are interesting when you're reading. And those are valid ways of responding to people's work too, just being a reader, rather than just responding from where you are as the person, as the audience, the person on the other side, and not necessarily like, I have to find what's wrong. I have to find what's wrong, like it's a test. Like if you can't find what's wrong, you've done it wrong. You've done peer response wrong. And I agree with this. I think criticizing people's work is a challenging task, and it can be nerve-wracking. So I think, and they did talk here about like, being able to find a balance between being very negative and being too positive, and figuring out like what's the right way, like especially when you're dealing with another person and how they're going to react to your feedback. I think sometimes that's why people find peer review uncomfortable. Especially because we do get that sense of needing to tell people like feel like we need to tell people what's wrong with their work. You can tell people what's right about their work. That's good feedback too. Sometimes we don't know what's right with what we've done until somebody has pointed it out. But I think like just that aspect of feeling like you're correcting something can make it very uncomfortable and very nerve-wracking. And I think we also worry that we're going to tell people like the wrong thing because we're supposed to be correcting it. So what if we tell them the wrong thing and then they do it and then it's our fault, and we question like whether or not we have any business giving them feedback, especially like if you're, in a class with people that are like, we're in the same class, we're kind of at the same level. Like, how are you supposed to correct other people in the same class with you, if that makes sense? So I hear people talk about that sometimes too. I think moving down, like this next person said, like up until recently, it hasn't been more than just like a pat on the back or a confirmation of ideas or answers in terms of like peer feedback. I also have a hard time myself with producing meaningful responses. I think it takes a lot of practice. I think peer response itself is practicing writing, because you have to read a lot of writing and talk about writing a lot in order to get better at writing. And the more you give feedback, the better you get at feedback. So doing it in and of itself isn't something you have to feel like you are always like hitting the nail on the head, even to be helpful. And sometimes what we think isn't meaningful ends up being really helpful to people later. So I guess like I understand that too. Like we don't want to be wrong. We don't know if what we're saying is actually going to help that person, but sometimes we're too judgmental of ourselves when we're giving feedback, and have like really high, like I guess like really high expectations for what we're supposed to be giving them. And it can be as much as just saying like, I really liked when you said this, or I really liked how you did this, or I have a question about this. Can you talk more about this? Sometimes it can be kind of corrective. Like I think, I think Professor E said we have to have this. Is that right? And then y'all can talk out some of the requirements and figure that out. But there's lots of ways to come at like being meaningful. Sometimes like we put too much pressure on ourselves to like fix the entire paper, or be able to say like exactly the right thing, or it's not going to be meaningful. They're not going to be able to do something with it. Sometimes just you and that person discussing their topic can be really helpful, because it gets them thinking about it in ways that they might not have thought about it before. I really like this point here. We're going to get to it a little bit more specifically in a minute. I like very specific comments. When a partner we just put a question mark or write unclear, it would always stress me out. Just because I think if we're not being really specific, especially in written feedback, the way that we're having to do in this class without like that discussion, it's really hard to know like what they meant or what we're supposed to do with it. So you see all this stuff that's like things that I need to go back and revisit, but no idea what to do, and that can be really stressful and unclear, and we'll talk about that when we get to the tip sheet just a little bit more. In this section, I just kind of pulled a couple of like connections with the reading kind of in different ways. I thought it was really interesting when people pulled like their own experience or their own like analogy. So with this one, they're talking about being a ballet, like when you're a ballet dancer, and you can think about this with a lot of things, like in your life, like it kind of falls along the same lines. Um, we get corrections all the time in class and rehearsals, and making sure to apply them the right way. So she talked a little bit about that. And to skip down a little bit, the connection between watching and doing, what she found was difficult because you have to take what you watched and apply it to where you are now in the learning process. You can't only observe and expect to do exactly how professionals do without practicing and finding the way that works best for you. Because I think that's one of the things that Suzanne was talking about in her essay, or Miss Haliburta, in her essay, is that um, like one of the things with peer review is that you get different things from reading and modeling like expert work or something that is like a higher level versus what you get by working with people that are at the same skill level. um, because it's for different purposes, just like you might get different feedback and a way of talking about your work from a peer than you would from your professor. When we get to like scholarly articles, you'll notice that like you're looking at these texts, and there's a lot that you can like glean from them in terms of being a model. But it's also really helpful to talk to other people at the same level in the same class, working with the same assignment, seeing how people go at it in different ways, talking about things that you're struggling with. Like there's just different things that you can get. Um, it also can be helpful for me to see and read other people's writing and see what I can take away from them and apply to my own work. That's one of the really good things about having peer response in a class, is seeing how other people are doing it, seeing what other ideas people had for coming at the same assignment, um, seeing what other people are doing well that you can apply, work on, things like that. The next student said, I got into weightlifting pretty seriously this semester, and almost everything I've learned about weightlifting is from watching other people and talking to them about how different machines work. Also sounds a little bit like learning a new genre, like reading some, examples and things like that of the same thing, figuring out what the expectations are and how stuff works. One thing that was new was from the second article. You're not an editor. You're not a teacher. And this kind of is something that we'll come back to a couple of times. Like this is just like a really good quote, because I think it really like sets, like, I guess like relieves the pressure of that expectation of trying to be the teacher and trying to be the editor. When we're editing, we're correcting. Being an editor is very different than responding to something, or editing is very different than responding to something, and the editing process is very different than the like early writing process, which is when we're giving responses and responding to people's ideas and helping them get to where everything is like organized and set the way you want it to, the way you want it to be. Then you edit, because editing is more like correcting grammar and correcting citations and correcting, like really getting into like the detailed things that you might not necessarily want to get into until you've covered all of the bigger, broader things that need to be worked on. Last point, the best part about playing against someone on a similar skill level is the fact that both of you are learning and can only benefit from each other's efforts. Watching the pros would relate to reading articles of advanced authors, like scholarly articles, because you are learning from them and seeing how they write in their own way. I just thought that was a really good, like, summative, like, takeaway point of the difference between like thinking about getting feedback like on different levels, like students, teachers, like different kinds of text, like working with working with and reading peers work versus like what you can get from reading like a scholarly article. I just thought that was a really good like overview point. And that's actually all I'm going to include in this part of the overview. There's going to be another video that kind of goes over the tip sheet separately, and some important things about peer review for the class. And then I'll post a separate little video. I know there's a lot of little videos, but I try to keep, I think it's easier to see the content like kind of split up than it is to see like one ginormous thing that you have to kind of sift through. So I'm going to actually add these as 3 separate kind of review videos that you can kind of look through and take breaks and just makes it a little bit more compartmentalized and easy to follow, I think. So, peace.